This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
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 Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten. This is the Troutbitten podcast, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski, and I'm joined today by my friends Bill, Trevor, Austin, and Josh, whom I'll introduce in a moment. This is episode 14, and we're here for a deep dive into winter fishing tactics. It's the middle of December now, and here in Pennsylvania, the habits of trout are starting to shift. But honestly, these habits are similar wherever trout live across the U.S., especially the wild trout. While living in an area with 4 distinct seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, the trout show us predictable habits every year. Now, some of those habits trend with the hatches, and in the springtime especially, we find trout responding to bugs both on the surface and underneath. Summertime brings longer days, higher sun, and fewer major hatches around here, so the trout change their rhythms. The waters where we expect to find trout in the summer change, and so does the way they respond to our flies. Fall has its own rhythms, of course, and around here, we see a marked interest in streamers and bigger nymphs, sometimes. Much of the fall season, too, centers around the brown trout's preparation for the spawn, recovery post-spawn, and of course their migration and the activity of spawning itself. So on our Pennsylvania waters, right now, the wild brown trout have finished spawning. The last trout I saw on a red was a few days ago, and most of the reds are now empty. But let me point this out. If you weren't around the water during the spawn, then you might consider staying away until March, once the eggs hatch. And I'm not kidding. All of the discussion out there about giving spawning trout their space seems centered on the time of the spawn itself. But we should realize the eggs are now in those spawning beds, in those reds, until March or even April when they finally hatch into the next generation of trout. And stepping through the spawning gravel then does considerable damage to the eggs within, not only crushing the eggs, but displacing them too. But no one ever seems to mention this. Do you know what to look for? Do you know where the reds are in your rivers? And do you know what spawning gravel looks like once it's silted over? Understand that the easily identifiable clean gravel of a trout red quickly silts over once the trout are done using it, and it blends in with the rest of the riverbed. So honestly, when the reds are covered over, they can be very hard to recognize. And I think many anglers do themselves and the trout a disservice by not witnessing some of the spawn with clean reds, just to learn about where trout build these reds and what sections to avoid stepping through, all the way through the winter. Because if you plan to fish through the winter months, then it makes sense to know what to look for and where you should not wade. Around here, most of the trout spawning happens right in the main rivers, but the trout use only a small percentage of that water. We fish during the spawn, but we never fish for spawning trout, and the reds are easily visible and avoidable. Then we carry that knowledge about the locations and the characteristics of spawning gravel all the way through the winter, so we know what to avoid. Okay, that's my short public service announcement, and now we can get on with the show. Back to winter fishing tactics. So, because the trout have different habits in the winter, we refine our approach to meet them on their own terms. Is that low and slow? Sure, sometimes. But for the winter trout angler who's attentive, the opportunities for some great streamer action are there too. Even dry flies can be an option if you keep your eyes open. Why do so few anglers fish in the winter? Well, honestly, because it's a challenge that many fishermen are not ready for. And while they may hit the water once or twice, so much is different and difficult that the results often don't meet expectations. Then the warm fireplace seems the better option, and the fly rod is leaned in the corner until springtime. So what does it take to catch trout in the winter? Well, that's what we're here to discuss this evening. But first, let me introduce my friends with our customary question and answer round. This is my friend Josh Darling, who owns Wilds Media. How are you, Josh?
Doing real good, man.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Hey, how do you go about fishing a new stream? What's your plan of attack when it's brand new to you? Or do you just kind of wing it?
No, when a stream is brand new to me, I approach it with much more of a cherry picking mentality, just because I want to learn, I want to learn what's in the very best spots. And so I don't usually spend as much time working the whole stream with full coverage styles. I'll use generally a confidence pair of nymphs and something that I have a lot of success with on other streams, and I'm gonna hit the most prime spots, and I'm just gonna do that until I have a pretty good idea of what's in there.
You get to fish new water very often?
Not very often.
That's because you have how many kids?
I have 3 kids, the oldest of which is 3.
That's a good that's a good reason to stay a little closer to home sometimes. Yeah. Hey, here's everyone's favorite radio voice, Austin Dando. What's up, buddy?
Hey now.
Austin, everyone asks about knots. I get that recommendation for a question all the time. And we all have our favorites. But will you first tell us your favorite knot for attaching the fly, then your favorite for joining tippet to tippet?
Yeah. Favorite knot for attaching the fly is the Davy knot, for sure, hands down. Tippet to tippet is double surgeon's knot. Tie it fast, tie it easy, doesn't require a lot of waste. Same advantages from the Davy knot. A couple turns, you can pull it tight. If you pull it tight enough, oftentimes you don't even have to clip the tag.
Right on.
It's pretty easy.
You know who doesn't clip the tag on?
Bill Dell, probably.
Right. Bill Dell does not. Did I mention this already? Bill Dell and I were guiding the other day, about a week or so ago, and I noticed he does not clip the tag every time he attaches a fly.
Well, his flies are so big, you're not going to ever notice.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you fish 18s, my tags are bigger than the flies.
Yeah, I know.
Fish will eat them. I've got pictures to prove
It
it.
doesn't matter. I agree. It just looks strange. And the clients were like, shouldn't that be clipped? Is that going to screw things up?
Now, we'll mention if it's a heavy wire or like a streamer hook is, I'll do a triple Davies. Sometimes I'll have a regular Davies knot pull out on me, but if I put one more turn in the loop, I don't have that issue any longer.
By heavy wire, you mean like a heavy, like a size 4, size 6 hook?
Yeah, exactly.
Right on.
Right around size 4 is when it starts.
Nobody likes the clinch knot.
On streamers, on like large wire, like they're talking about, I use a clinch knot. But
at night when I go, large
always
wire,
clinch
bigger.
then. Yeah.
Try the triple.
What's the matter with the double? What about the double? You skipped right over the double, Davy.
What? No, the regular Davy is the double.
Oh, now we're just
Let the
renaming
record
things.
stand.
I'm going to talk to Davy Watton about that. I don't think he called it a double Davy.
I never called it that.
I leave the tag on so that I can untie that clinch knot and tie another fly back on and not have to cut it.
This is actually pretty cool. I was busting your balls about that. I was like, just cut the nut, cut the tag. And Bill, explain it more a little bit. The reason Bill leaves the tag is because of this.
So I leave the tag. So I tie clinch knot and I'll leave. I mean, if you get good at it, you can, and you care a lot, you can get it down to very small.
Yeah.
Most times I'm leaving, I don't know, let's say 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of a tag.
Right, it's
off
not
of there.
huge, right?
I use 3X most of the times. It's not, when you cinch that clinch knot down, the 3X doesn't fray and kind of weaken as much as smaller tippet, like maybe let's say 5X. If I want to switch flies, you can just take your 2 fingers and just kind of pull that clinch knot back. The clinch knot will open up, slip a new fly on there, tie the same knot, pull it down.
Hold on.
Really? I know, that's pretty
You're
slick.
untying your clinch knot?
Yes, I've tried it.
Yeah.
He's right. It actually works easier with a Davy knot.
Really?
I don't know about your triple Davy, but no, it's same. You can do the same thing with a Davy. It's pretty slick.
Interesting.
I got to try this.
It won't work with 6X. I did it on 4X when I tried it.
Yeah. I think 4X and above, I feel more confident in it. Once it gets down to 5X and you tie that knot again, I just feel like it's fraying and kind of
right. Gets
a little too
pigtail,
weak.
like a pigtail. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why I like having fishing buddies because I never would have thought of that, but it's pretty cool.
What do the rest of you guys use for tippet to tippet?
I'm an Orvis tippet knot.
Orvis tippet.
I'm a blood knot
I
guy.
like the Orvis
I'm
tippet
double
knot,
surgeons
too.
for me.
I like the Orvis tippet knot because you're using the added in line, so you waste very little of the main line. I often leave a tag to tie a tag nymph, a tag fly up there. And I like that up tag, the tag that points, up and away from the line and keeps things a little bit
Separated.
less tangled.
I do that with a double surgeons. You just tie it in reverse. You tie the short end into the double surgeons instead, and you still get that tag pointed up.
Yeah, I will say though, if you use the up tag on a double surgeons, you'll break off. You just never catch big enough fish to realize it. Come on. I was just busting your balls.
Okay.
Josh slowly
No,
walks
seriously,
off
it
set.
took me. I know, right? It did. It took me a couple years to realize that I was breaking off. At
Really?
the double surgeons because I was using the up tag. Yep. And for me, I break off. Maybe it's the way I tie it. You're probably doing something.
No, it is
different.
something. I've seen it
wonder
close
about
up. Like I've seen guys talk about it, and I've seen the knots close up, and it's the way it pulls through the. And it happens a lot more with 5X than it would with 3X, obviously, because basically that up tag is acting as a knife through the knot.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of the knot tightening, it's actually just cutting through the actual
You got
joint.
it.
And so something about the Orvis tippet knot design,
Correct.
it's really just a double infinity knot. Just reverses that pull. Or anyway, you can use either the up tag or the down tag. Hey, here's my buddy, Dr. Trevor Smith. What's up, Doc?
Good evening.
You like that?
I like that. What's up, Doc?
Pretty
Doctor.
good. All right, I have.
Doctor.
It's just a little special tidbit right here. Here we go. Special little feature, little highlight from Dr. Trevor Smith. The last time we were all together, it was episode 12, and I asked you about wool.
That's right.
I can see you're getting a little nervous about this. Don't be nervous.
He's excited. He's excited.
It's not anxiety, it's excitement. Being the most educated member of our group, and I think that's fair to say, I figured you could handle that question in episode 12. But you know, Trevor, I mean, you kind of left us incomplete, a little incomplete.
Wasn't enough science.
Soft spot in the armor.
Right. Soft spot in the armor. And you texted me the next day with a bunch of follow-up information, bunch of screenshots, stuff you had learned because you couldn't stop yourself from researching a more complete answer. So Trevor, here's your chance for redemption or completion. What is it about wool that allows it to keep us warm even when wet?
Yeah.
What is it?
So it is amazing. And I'm kind of sad I didn't know this earlier in life because I've been kind of blown away by some of this information. But I did geek out on this pretty good. It was,
Yes,
it was
you
a fun diversion. So first of all, let me say that was a great question, Dom.
Right. You know, that's a great question. Thank you.
So like I mentioned a couple podcasts ago, wool fibers are crimped and bent. So that makes them nonlinear in appearance. And I referenced that. And that crimp in the wool fiber creates space between each strand, as opposed to lining up side by side or laying down flat together. And this, when you create a fabric out of it and weave it together, creates tiny air pockets that act as little insulators. So that's the key to being able to keep you both warm and cool within the same fabric. Air has the ability to move heat by convection, right? So transporting heat from one place to another. But when that air is contained in those small pockets next to your skin, it doesn't circulate as easily, so the body heat can be retained. Same goes the other direction if the ambient temperature is warmer than the air next to your skin. So think like a styrofoam cooler where the tiny pockets of air act as insulators for heat or cold, depending on what's inside that cooler. So that's kind of the cool part about just the natural structure of the fiber. But into why wool is so amazing in the wet. Let's kind of move into that.
Yeah.
Wool is what's called a hygroscopic material. That's HYGROSCOPIC. Hygroscopic.
No, we're spelling.
So that is that when wool is completely dry, it will adsorb water, and that's ADSORB. Adsorb water.
We're still spelling things.
As opposed to absorb.
No, I get you.
Adsorb water until
that's important.
From the air until it comes to an equilibrium with the surrounding air. And that process is called conditioning. So adsorption, that process that's occurring to create this conditioning, is the process by which one material, in this case water vapor, travels in its vapor form and forms a superficial monomolecular layer on a solid. So as that water vapor is pulled within the wool fiber, it actually condenses, correct? And so that's an exothermic process. So the process by which a wool shirt, when you move outside into a cool, humid environment, becomes conditioned to the humidity of the outdoors, it actually generates heat, giving you greater value, obviously, as a fabric. It works the other way, too. If you're working hard enough to sweat, the wool will actually adsorb the water vapor coming off your body, preventing that vapor from condensing on your skin. So you don't have the impression of sweating or the amount of moisture remaining on your skin. And wool can do both at the same time, which is pretty amazing. So imagine like hiking into a fishing spot on a cold, rainy day. It protects you against the moisture coming in from the outside while conditioning is warming you, but then is also adsorbing that moisture vapor produced by your body as you're exerting yourself, keeping you dry and from experiencing that overcooling effect that will occur as your body temperature cools after you stop and start fishing. So It's pretty incredible. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yes, you are. I can see it in your face.
Have you traded and burned all your clothes and just got everything?
He is wearing a merino wool shirt right now.
I am. That's a merino wool shirt. I've been hunting since I was a little kid, and I was always a wearer of wool since I was young. And this more gives me a little bit of a better understanding as to why that fabric is so special. Now, I will say, though, we have the benefit, and I have the fortune of having a lot of good merino wool clothing, which is very comfortable and non-irritating to the skin. As a kid, I had pretty sensitive skin and allergies, and the wool that I wore as a kid irritated me more and was itchy. So for guys that are saying like, well, wool's not really an option for me because it always irritates my skin, invest in some good merino base layers. You'll experience all the benefits of wool without the downside of that kind of itchy, scratchy fabric.
Is there any synthetic fiber that does anything similar?
No, there's nothing that even scratches the surface of it. I mean, you'll notice on a lot of the...
Was that a pun?
Was
that a pun?
That's a pun. There are a lot of... you can even go deeper into this, but there's a lot of synthetic fibers that do one aspect of wool really well, such as, you think of your dry wicking with like Under Armour, Nike dry fit shirts do an excellent job at wicking moisture away from the body. Terrible job at insulating, but they also retain smell and scent very easily. Wool almost retains zero scent and is very resistant to bacterial growth and to just retaining smell in general. So, but they still provide that wicking ability. As you move outwards from that base layer, there can be arguments to use, down as an excellent insulator if you want to just get that insulation property. But again, every time you choose a fabric other than wool or a substance other than wool, you're going to have some concession. And I think for anglers, because, we're oftentimes hiking a good deal in the wintertime, you may even submerge your arm in the water, landing a fish. You need a fabric that can handle and continue to insulate while wet, and nothing can do it like wool can. So it's pretty awesome. Troutbitten wool series coming up.
There you go. All right, so that's the wool podcast. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you in episode 15. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your support. Goodbye. Dr. Wool. All right, I love it. He knows what he's talking about now.
Yep.
Thank you, Trevor. Here's Bill Dell.
How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. Hey. Hey, Bill, I have one.
Uh-oh. What do you got?
Describe the perfect fishing companion.
A guy dressed in a wool shirt.
It starts there.
There we go. That's how I came walking into your life.
Yep, exactly. He just shows up in a wool shirt and wants to go fishing. Oh, that's a good one.
He likes it. Thank you. I ask good questions.
I would say for me, it's somebody that's like dynamic in that they don't want to fish the same way every single day. I get bored in fishing the same. Like if I go out and nymph fish every day, it would bore me. So some days I want it to be streamers. I like somebody that is going to keep up and move fast.
Yep. You ever find one of those guys? Like move.
Greg fishes at about the same speed as I do, if not maybe a little faster. Yeah.
You do fish fast. Is that it? Is that all the qualities?
I think, yeah.
All right. Then we can be done because we wasted a lot of time. I mean, we spent a lot of time on wool. I'm just kidding. All right. Let's take a quick break and we'll be back in just a few seconds to share our best winter tips and tactics. Fulling Mill is the world's leading producer of flies, fly boxes, hooks, beads, and tippet. Known for their barbless hooks, they have many of your favorite trout patterns tied barbless. Not only that, they feature patterns from anglers like George Daniel, Pat Weiss, Josh Miller, Joe Goodspeed, and many others from around the world. Every pattern is backed by the 200% Fulling Mill guarantee. If a fly isn't up to the highest standards that you expect, they will replace it with two that are. Stock up at fullingmill.com or ask for their flies at your local dealer. So, in this 14th episode of the Troutbitten podcast, we're nearing the end of our first season. And looking back, if you've followed from the beginning, I think you'll see that we're building something here. We have a lot to share, and these experiences are too big for one podcast episode. The tactics we love are too diverse for just one conversation. So in season 1 of the Troutbitten podcast, we've introduced a number of topics broadly, with plans to put more meat on the bones later. And that's very much what we're doing here tonight. We're talking more about winter tactics and sharing winter fishing strategies for nymphs and streamers. So in episode 11, we addressed how to stay warm in the winter. In episode 5, we introduced the versatility of the mono rig. In episode 9, we covered some favorite streamer tactics. And in episode 12, we got specific about how we use an indicator on the mono rig, taking tightline principles over to an indicator system. And all of that sets up what we're here to talk about tonight. Go back and listen to those podcasts if you haven't already. You can also find the Fly Fishing in the Winter series on Troutbitten. It's in the top menu under series. There are 20 or more articles that cover much of what we'll talk about tonight in great detail. That's sort of what Troutbitten has become. Really, I've written nearly 800 articles now on the website that provide more depth to topics than most books even have room for. And now we have this podcast series with the diverse opinions of my friends and some of the best anglers that I know. So guys, I know that for all of us, nymphs and streamers are the flies that we use in the winter most. So let's start with this. How do you choose? I mean, what do you start with on a winter morning?
I always start with a streamer just because I want to see if they're on streamers.
Do you?
Because I'm starting in the morning, there's no sun up. And so if they're going to eat streamers at any point in that day, it's probably going to be first light.
That's a fair point. And really, the light conditions do have a lot to do with everything. And what I asked, obviously, is a very general question that has so many things about, do you know the stream? Or are you jumping right into a honey hole? I get it. But what's your strategy? Nymphs, streamers?
I jump in with nymphs just because I think I fish nymphs the most. And after the walk-in, fishing nymphs to me just puts me into the right place mentally. I think it dials me in mentally. I start getting my drifts in. I start observing the water and the water type and the speed of the current and maybe even just the fish's behavior a little bit. After Bill's point, I think I'm going to start fishing streamers sometimes to begin with because I think that's a great point, Bill. But I think there's just something about starting the day with nymphs. It's a familiar place. It's a confident place. And if I can get a few fish in the net to start the day, I'm more willing to explore with my tactics after that.
Yeah, I like that. Bill's point's great. I mean, and so maybe I'm looking at the weather conditions and I'm thinking, well, that sun's going to come over the mountain pretty quick. And if I know it's going to be a blue sky, sunny day in the winter, that can be pretty tough. And we all love a streamer bite, and that is a lot of fun. Definitely. I'm more like you, Trevor. I'm most confident in catching fish, and I like to get a fast start. I pretty much start with nymphs, unless, I know that sun's going to come up.
Do you guys care if it's, let's say it's 17 degrees versus 30 degrees? Does that change your mind?
No, not around here, though. But, we talk about that, too. What about water temperature in the winter, guys? You following that? You tracking it?
Occasionally, but a lot of times I'm looking for, in the winter especially, looking for places that are spring fed and even trying to fish near the spring, or near springs that I know. And I just think that that's going to give me a really consistent temperature. And so I do carry a thermometer and I like to check every once in a while, but I'm not real religious about it. And I don't really keep all that much track of it. I just know the spots that have been really consistent in winters past. And I look for spots like that. And usually I look for springs.
That's a cool point. So around here we have the blessing, really, of all the spring water. You can have tailwaters, kind of giving you consistent water temperatures as well. But what you just brought up, within our spring creeks that all have at least half of their flow, let's say, right out of the ground, you have those spring seeps or little springs coming, trickling off or out of the mountain. You can often see those, even in the wintertime, they'll have green around them. Yeah. And that's a warm spot in the winter and, of course, a cool spot in the summer. Those are always great spots, usually great spots to target fish. Even a moderate spring seems to have a pretty big effect on the water. I mean, it seems to not just this little piece, this little 5-foot spot coming off the bank. No, it seems to kind of warm up the whole pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be up to I really do think it can be 50 yards impact. And I don't really know if that's actual
downstream. Yeah.
I don't know if that's actual impact on the trout, on the temperature, but I do think that it's like impact on the trout's behavior in that area of the stream.
Oh, that's neat.
I think it'd be interesting to learn, and I'd like to, maybe this will be my next research topic, but to look at how, like what happens to that water as it comes out underneath a blanket of colder water, whether it flattens, because I would imagine that water quickly disperses and sort of creates a layer at the bottom of that section of stream and water, which is, coincides with the layer that our fish are holding in, right? And so...
Right, that's where the fish are.
And so I think that it could drastically change feeding behavior for that section, like Josh said, maybe 50 yards or 50 feet or anything like that. And having looked into the temperatures earlier this year, one thing that really struck me was how much of like almost an on-off switch there is noticed, at least in the feeding behavior of trout, given different temperatures. And so that could make a huge, huge difference on your fishing success, is to notice those. I think Josh was basically listing off ways that he indirectly targets warmer sections in the wintertime without necessarily temping at all. He's just looking for the actual evidences of that warmer water. Yeah. And I think that's a really, really cool way to do it, and a good thing that everyone should be looking for.
That's cool. The thermometer for me, that's something I use most in the summer. And I went through years where I was tracking the temperature and even sometimes recording the temperature and looking back and trying to understand, looking back at that data and trying to understand how it affected the fish behavior, my fish count, if I was counting. Honestly, I didn't find all that much correlation, but we are in a region of fairly stable temperatures. Anyway, in the winter, here's my thing. I know I'm going fishing because I have the time, so I don't take the temperature that much. I almost don't want it to get in my head. I don't want to say, oh no, it's 38, so, or 36 or 37. It's probably going to be slower. I'm like, I'm on the water. I'm going to fish. And then I'll do like what you're saying, Josh, is look for those regions where things could perhaps be a little faster action. Bill?
I've seen crazy situations where the stream's icing over. One of my best winter memories was the stream was freezing. Like my flies were literally freezing with ice over them. But for some reason, I don't know if those fish were just in a last grasp to feed before it got completely frozen over, but they were moving. Yeah. Considerable distances to eat small, big flies, and I caught some really good fish that day. And it was shocking to me that the water had to be darn close to 32 degrees. Yeah. But I've seen the opposite, where you think, man, it should be a good day because it warmed up in the winter.
That is shocking to me. So we're talking about spring creeks, and that's, we live in the central PA region. And lots of people around the country, have similar stable water temperatures, also with tailwaters. It matters whether you're fishing a limestone stream or a freestone stream. If I go north of here, now I'm fishing waters that aren't holding at like 40 degrees. All of a sudden, I'm in the mid-teens. Let's say I'm fishing in January. My expectations go way down. Yep. For
mine
you guys
don't
feel the same?
Yeah.
Really? Tell me. Well,
no, but seriously, I do think the limestone streams are more consistent, but I think it depends on the water level. Okay. If the water level is at a good volume, so let's say mid to high in a freestone stream, from my experience, I've seen them fish as good, if not better, than limestone streams, because some of those freestone streams, those fish need to feed before maybe there's an ice over, and so if there's volume of water, if there's if it's not 10 degrees out, those fish are going to feed well.
So you're basically pitting food availability over that stable temperature, which I can definitely see.
That's cool.
That's interesting.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That does make sense.
Do you think then if it's 34 degrees, which is darn cold, but you have that, have that middle or upper flow, you think that's,
I think that's a good thing. I think because at that point there's more food in the, let's say the stream's at a high level at that point. There's more food out there in the water columns, and so they have more opportunity to feed, and so it might rile them up a little bit.
That's cool. Yeah. That's why I like you. You always have unexpected
random things,
answers and ideas. Yeah, that's 2 tonight. Yeah. That's good. Let me back up here and ask this. Do you need to be out in the morning It's funny. I mean, some of the local fly shops will tell you, hey, wintertime, don't worry about it. You know, those trout are going to be most active when the water warms up, the sun warms up the water. Just get out like 11, 12, maybe even 1 o'clock. You'll be good. You know, get a few hours of fishing in. Do you guys feel that way?
If you're able to go out in the morning, go out in the morning.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We already touched on this earlier, but the sun is still a factor in the wintertime.
You mean the sun's
brightness?
You mean warming up? Brightness. Thank you.
Yeah. So the sun in the fish's eyes is still as much as a factor as it is in the winter, as it is as any other season.
Right.
I think there's advantages that you can still kind of get on your side when the weather's cold and early. I often find that morning fishing in the winter can often be quite good.
Yes.
And sometimes once that sun comes out, it shuts down. And then that's when everyone else shows up and they're thinking, man, it's so slow in the winter.
Right. And to your point on the sunlight, I think never is the river more naked than in the winter, right? You know, there's no foliage.
So true.
And those trout have to be feeling as vulnerable as possible.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, good point.
The sun hits them a lot sooner
Big time.
than it does.
Nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Yep.
Look for the pine trees.
Yeah, I mean, we're early in the winter. I guide up until Christmas every year. And then, of course, I fish after Christmas. Anyway, I spend a lot of mornings on the water going into the afternoons. And I promise, I have better action in the morning than I do the afternoons. I think people want to tell you that, hey, just go out in the afternoons because it's easier. You know, I think people want it to be that way. But for me, it's not that way. For me, it's still a morning thing. If I can get out in the morning, I'm going.
Absolutely.
It might be more uncomfortable. You know, the winter morning might be 15 degrees. The winter afternoon might warm up to 30. Boy, that's so much more comfortable.
I have seen times when the last hour, maybe last 2 hours of the day, that sometimes the fish will really turn on. I rarely fish that late, but in the winter, you know, that's still only 5 o'clock. So I'm not in bed quite yet.
Yeah. Because we live in the Spring Creek region, I don't go north too much anymore and fish freestone streams. But when I have, and when I used to quite a bit, I did find that afternoons with sunny conditions and perhaps that water was warming up a degree or two, it could make a difference. And so, you know, so like so many things in fishing, it all depends. Mm-hmm. It might matter more. That sun and that warming up effect in the afternoon, yeah, I think it can matter more, absolutely, in the freestone streams.
I feel like limestone streams, when that sun is out, those fish are much less likelier to feed, maybe because they don't need to. They have the ability to take their time and feed when they want to, where in freestone streams, when the sun is out, I feel like the fish are a little bit more eager to eat.
I think it might even be reflective of the temperature relativity. You know, like in a freestone stream, it might be moving you from 32, 33 degrees up to 38. And that's a big deal when it comes to like fish metabolism. Whereas if you're moving from 41 or 2 to 44, that's you're at a different place on that curve of trout metabolism. So I don't think it's activating them quite as much.
That's nice. So where do they eat? Where do the trout eat most in the wintertime? Everybody tells you low and slow. So many anglers seem to assume, because it's repeated, I think, so often, well, I'm going to fish the pools then. The trout just go to the deep pools, and that's where I'm going to fish them. Where do you guys think they feed most in the wintertime?
I'm going to go and say it's the same places that they do in the summer, but smaller places within those places. Like I think, like, you know what I mean? Because I think that they're in the same riffles, and I think that they're in the same runs. I think that they're in the same holes, but I do think that they try to find the easier water within those places. And so maybe it's deeper, maybe it's a little bit slower, maybe it's softer. And so I think that in a lot of cases they're holding in the same places, with some exceptions, obviously. But I think that they're feeding primarily in those slightly easier to hold places.
I do find a lot less fish in shallow riffles in the wintertime, though, however I'll say. While you may find them on occasion, I mostly find fish in, maybe 2 feet of water and a walking pace.
Yeah.
It can also pot up pretty dramatically in big holes, too.
Yeah, right on. In certain rivers, they'll congregate. Yeah. As the winter goes on, those trout absolutely pod up, or just find those sections that do have that spring flow influence.
Some days in the wintertime around here for our creeks, you almost just have to wait until you find a pod of fish. And, you'll fish all these bobber holes until there's a pocket of them, and you'll catch 5 at one time, and you'll go on for 30 minutes and catch nothing. And, there's another pocket of them. And sometimes that's the name of the game.
Yeah, fishing is always about catching fish in patches. You catch nothing for 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes, and then bang, 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 bang. You catch 3 or 4 in one spot. But in the winter, I find what you're saying to be true, Austin. It's like you find a piece of water that is really nice for those trout for some reason. So in the winter, they just seem to congregate more than any other season. To your point there, Josh, I agree with you. I find them in the same general sections as the same as they'll be in the summer. Now, in the summer, I find them pushed up into the, like Austin said, in the shallow riffles, into the oxygenated water. But in the winter, they might be in that same run, but then I like what you said there, right over into the softer section. Again, I just want to keep clarifying through this podcast that we're talking about limestone streams, spring-fed streams. I think tailwaters are similar. When you get in freestone streams, they will often be you will find them potted up more. The client I was with today, he said, oh, we're going to fish pools. We're going to fish pools because the water's getting colder. Even if you could get a bird's eye view and see, a dozen or maybe 2 dozen trout in a pool, in a hole, in a big, deep hole, I don't think they're feeding in there much because, boy, I've tried to fish over them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just holding there, hibernating perhaps, whatever you want to call it. I don't think they're feeding much. I think when they want to feed, I think they still go to those riffles, runs, but then again, the soft edges of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think a big reason for that is because in those spots, I think the food is pretty sparse. Yeah. In those deeper...
In the pools.
Yeah, exactly, in the pools. Right. Yeah, it's the same thing as in the summer. Food is knocked loose in the normal feeding areas.
The nymphs are always in those riffles and runs. Just because it's wintertime doesn't mean the nymphs to go down into the pools. The nymphs need extra oxygen to live, especially mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies. So those nymphs, their nymphs are going to be there. And when the trout want to feed, they go up into those riffles, runs, but they're not going to fight the heaviest water either.
The way I think about it a lot of times is the current on the bottom of the river is the same speed. No matter how much water is over top of it, there's always going to be more food in the riffles. And so if a fish wants to feed, while there's, let's say, a foot of really fast water, that trout doesn't have to work a whole lot to just hold directly on the bottom of it because that current speed on the bottom of the river is slow.
Right.
We call it the strike zone a lot of times, meaning like a baseball strike zone, like it's where you want to be because that's where everything in the river happens. It's that cushion of water that's going slower than everything else. It's going slower than everything else because it's bumping against the rocks and having to go around them. It's the friction of the riverbed that's slowing it down. Anyway, that's where everything happens. It's where the trout sit, where the nymphs are.
Right.
Like you're saying, it's always the same speed. And it's comfortable for the fish to sit in. They don't have to work too much.
In my experience, in the wintertime, I do really well in pools.
Tell us.
At least in my opinion, I think there's still plenty in our waters, plenty of bugs on the bottom of a pool, and there's plenty of bugs up towards the head of a riffle or the run of that.
To the head.
And
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
To the head, to the spill out or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I find a lot of feeding fish in pools in my experience. If I throw a bobber on in a bobber hole and I get however long, 20-yard drift and get a pretty drag-free presentation, I put a good-looking drift and a good-looking bug in their area that they're thinking, oh, look at this, it's coming to me. I didn't have to go up into that hard stuff to wait for it. I'll just go ahead and eat that.
It is easier. So, Austin, you said bobber hole a few times. Tell us all about that. I mean, expand on the whole thing, right? This does go back to the tight line to the indicator concept. I mean, you could do it other ways, but tell us about bobber hole.
Yeah, so a bobber hole, to me at least, is water that I often can't fish with a tight line. Yeah. So that means it's either too deep, where it becomes inefficient for me to try to track a sighter, or it's just too far away, and I would never be able to wade into position to do that. Yeah. But a bobber hole, really, in my mind, it's a big, wide pool that is, I'd say, half of walking pace. It's a little featureless, I'd say. It maybe sometimes is a flatter looking water because there's not a lot of rocks near the surface breaking it up. Okay. And you kind of just work your way across it in straight line grids.
So you're saying it's a bobber hole because you can fish it better with a bobber. You said if you fished it pure tight line, perhaps you can't reach to it.
Right. It's a bobber hole because I can throw up far away from myself as well as far upstream because often these holes we're fishing with bobbers are pretty large. Yeah. I can just track that bobber back to myself and then let it go downstream of myself as well, 10, 15 yards. The advantage of the bobber is because I cannot fish that depth of water and that speed of water very well with a sighter. And allowing the bobber to take control and steer the nymphs for me is way more efficient.
That's a nice way to put it.
We are talking about a strike indicator for you elitists.
Oh, right. The bobber is a strike indicator. Yes. And we covered this in the other podcast, but yeah, we all use different kinds of indies. I love the yarn indie, but in the kind of water that Austin you're talking about, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I like throwing a hard indicator or a bobber on, whether it be a thingamabobber or an airlock, could be a corky. Yeah, these types of water just lend themselves to throwing that kind of indie. And all of us kind of do it on a tight line rig. You don't have to, but boy, you get some real benefits by doing it. I think another characteristic of these bobber holes is, like you said, Austin, you can often get very long drifts because you don't have big rocks breaking up that river bottom that you're going to run into. So you can get long drifts. Because the water is slower, you don't have to necessarily be right down very, very, very close to the riverbed. Because the water's slower, those fish, even though they're sitting with their bellies on the riverbed, it's not a big deal perhaps for them to rise a foot or two even to get your nymph and then just glide back down. Setting up long drifts is kind of a neat thing to do.
And the other characteristic of a bobber hole for me is something that is a one consistent speed for a long period of time, maybe 10 yards, where the river is the same speed. And so you don't have as much concerns with things getting in different seams, with fly and bobbin getting out of sync.
So that is a primary piece of water for all of us. As the winter goes on, I find myself fishing those more and more. I often will start the day, or I'll start the next section of water. I'll pick those bobber holes as my primary piece of water. That's my prime water. As the winter goes on, January, February, boy, that's where I'm probably going to spend most of my time because those trout will congregate like we talked about. And then truth is, I get cold. Give me 45 minutes or an hour in there, I'm starting to get pretty cold. I don't care how well I'm dressed. I'm starting to get cold. Because in those bobber holes, I'm not moving very much. I'm not building up very much body heat. I might catch 3 or 4 fish, get me a little bit excited. That's great, but I'm not building up body heat. So then I'll go from the nymphing tactics, and I can pretty quickly switch over to streamer tactics. And then when I'm fishing streamers, boy, I'm not going to fish the same water over and over and over and over. I'll switch to streamers just so I'm going to cover water, move fast, and build up that body heat again. You guys do anything like that?
I do that with nymphing and streamers.
Yeah, you'll just pick up the pace on the nymphs. Yeah,
just cherry pick.
Sure.
I really think cherry picking is more more productive on our streams in the winter than full coverage.
They're not as spread out. Well, they're not feeding in water that is spread out. Yeah.
I think more in the winter than ever. Like you said, Josh, I sort of try to figure out the type of water that I'm having success in and then just sort of work the stream to find that water repeated. And whether or not that's the way you have to fish, it's just nice to keep moving and keep targeting that particular type of water up through the stream.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I just feel like the winter, there's a limited water type that they're going to feed in.
Yep.
But Bill, when you're cherry picking, when you're moving up through those streamers, again, do they have to be low and slow? Or will you find fish that will, let's say in 38-degree water, will they still chase?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not I guess I don't move the fly and strip fast most times, and when I fish streamers, I like to give them time to eat it. But I don't change my presentation drastically in the winter. What'll change my presentation in the winter is if there's more water, I might need to get a little bit lower in the water column, so I might fish something that's a little bit more heavier. But as far as the tactic, it's about the same, except in the winter, you might have to get something that's going to sink another foot, maybe a foot and a half into the water column. It depends on your river, of course.
Our buddy Pat will tell you that winter season is streamer season.
Oh, yeah.
He loves it. He fishes from a boat a lot, too. Yeah, I mean, he does plenty of faster retrieves, and, especially if you're covering water.
And I think in the winter, a lot of times there's a lot more low light situations with clouds and just overall in our area.
Just low sun, too.
There just seems like more often we have cloudier days from, I don't know, let's say November to February than we do later in the year. And so those overcast days are streamer days.
Yeah, and the snow falling and stuff like that, those are great streamer days. They just kind of make me want to cover a bunch of water. Often I'll work downstream, and yet I'll kind of be fishing upstream. I'll quarter upstream. I like the head of the fly, face down and across. So anyway, I cast up as I'm wading down. But I'll wade down just so I can cover a whole bunch of water, almost as if I'm in a drift boat. Wade pretty fast, as if I was coming along with the drift boat, and just to give each spot 1 or 2 looks and then keep moving. I love fishing streamers in the winter.
Do you guys like tail outs at all? Lately, I don't know, last 2 years, I've really started to try to focus on them. Fall and winter seem to be really good times where I think other anglers and stuff that I've seen fish, I don't always see them target it. A couple weeks ago, I was out and a little bit colder, and that was my best area to catch good sized fish, was just a kind of a long, slow, consistent tail out with some little bit of structure.
Yeah, I love them, Bill. Again, I think they're another place that fish will congregate, and I'll find them there too.
I think streamers are sort of ideal for fishing tail outs because you can fish a downstream presentation and kind of cover that shallower water and sweep across it. But do you guys have any other tactics you like using in tail outs?
We do it a lot at night, right? We'll fish tail outs a lot at night.
Yep.
I'll throw almost any presentation, any style in any water. And so whatever it takes to cover that tail out. But yeah, I like that, Bill.
So guys, what do you guys think about flies in terms of fly size? A lot of people say that when the winter hits, you go real small, midges come out and all that. So what do you guys think about that? Are you guys fishing the same size flies you do in the summer, or are you going small?
Bigger than the summer, I guess. A lot of times bigger. I don't know. In my mind, I think, it's the water's colder. You got to give that fish a reason to move. And so give him a little bit bigger meal and maybe he'll move. I a lot of times in the winter fish 6 2X longs or 4 2X longs, like stone flies.
Bringing up stone flies is a good point. Like, why can you get away with such big stone flies?
Because they're always in there. The stone flies are on a 2-year life cycle. It takes them 2 years to grow to mature. So you always have smaller stone flies and almost adult size stone flies in the system. And while a lot of what you read, a lot of what people tell you about winter fishing is all about midges. Well, what's going on? What you see in the air is midges. So just fish these midges. Yeah. I'm not denying that. I'm sure, especially in tailwaters, perhaps that's your best option. Around here, that's not our best option. I'm with Bill.
Yeah.
I'm going to fish big stone flies to sort of motivate those trout. I fish egg patterns a lot. I don't need to go tiny. I don't need to, usually. And often, though, I'll pair up a zebra midge or a WD-40 or an RS2, all of these in the sizes of 18 and 20. But I say pair them up, often with an egg or a stone fly. I hardly ever, I'm going to say never. I never just fish, okay, I'm going to fish a pair of zebra midges. I don't do it. I fish it with I call it a bait and switch. Give them the bait, whether it be the egg or the stone fly. And then, the switch is perhaps if they do want to eat it small, but get their attention with something bigger.
Yeah. Bill, when you mentioned that you've often fished 2 big stone flies together, and then Dom, you followed that up with the bait and switch, I definitely typically do a bait and switch type presentation. But can you talk a little bit, Bill, maybe about what you think I think most of us probably don't fish 2 very small flies, but some of us fish the large and small, or a more attractor style and natural, like with the zebra midge and an egg or something like that. But then the 2 stone flies, what do you think that does in terms of attracting the trout, like in comparison to a bait and switch type tactic?
So when I'm fishing bigger flies, I'm fishing maybe my bottom fly is let's say a 6 2X stone fly. And then my tag fly, let's say it's like a size 12 or a size 10, like Walt's worm, or like a Polish woven fly.
Okay.
Let me say that to me, the biggest factor in deciding whether I'm going to throw that or I'm going to throw maybe smaller flies is the amount of water. If we're high in the wintertime, I want to be able to get those flies down. If it's low, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had a really low winter. And so I did fish midges because there just wasn't a lot of water. I'll switch between small presentations versus big presentations. I kind of have 2 methodologies. If it is lower, in my mind, I can throw that stone fly a longer distance away from me. And so since I can throw it further away from me, I think I spook less fish because I'm physically not closer to those fish. And so if I can throw it a longer distance, I think I have a less chance of spooking the fish.
But not only can you throw it a longer distance, but you can actually, that counterweight helps you continue to tight line effectively at a longer distance, right? Yeah.
Circling back to something you've talked about earlier, Bill, I know you don't fish split shot. You're talking about throwing a bigger fly so you can use a heavier weight. I don't care. I mean, I'm going to use whatever size fly I want, and then I'll add or subtract split shot. That's another way to look at it.
I feel like so much of this comes back to that theme of everything works sometimes. And it's hard to say, well, this works best in the winter and this doesn't work best in the winter.
Right.
So midges don't always work best in the winter, but, big flies don't also always work best. But for me, in my experience, and I think a lot of our experience is that some of our patterns that we fish all year round often work pretty darn good as well in the wintertime, with a couple differences, including things like eggs and maybe some smaller zebra midges and RS2s like you mentioned, Dom. So it's just subtle changes to the arsenal, I feel like, can sometimes turn the trick, and always have them in the box when things get cold.
When our trout are done spawning, that's for me when the egg bite starts. And I don't know why. I'm not even going to try to give you a theory on it. But they don't eat the egg so much during the spawn. I call it regional egg interest during the spawn. But then it just seems like as soon as those eggs are done dropping and the winter really kind of sets in, right about now, it was 2 weeks ago, really, the beginning of December, when that egg bite just turned on. And here we go. And it's, if they don't eat the egg on a winter day, you're kind of in trouble. That's what I say. I absolutely will rotate in stoneflies and whatnot. And I said I love going to streamers of all sizes and it kind of different speeds depending on how fast I want to work. But man, that egg for me is the thing. The way I rig the egg is unbeaded, no bead on the egg, and then I put split shot in front of it, 5 inches. If I could put it closer, I would. They don't seem to eat it any closer than 4 or 5 inches away. And then I'm using that shot, whatever I need to get down. Often then I'll trail that zebra midge that we've been talking about, or that RS2, or that WD-40, whatever, something small, something 20, a size 20, or an 18 1X short perhaps. I'll trail it. I'll trail it behind the egg. Sometimes I'll go ahead and put a tag nymph above. In a regular season where I'll run 20 inches between my two flies and my tag fly is 20 inches up. Now in the wintertime, I'll run it as close as 12 inches because they usually won't go too far up to get my tag fly, which is up above. But now if I just run it 12 inches up, you factor in your angles, you're really only riding 6 inches perhaps above your egg. And I'll get quite a few days where they're eating that tag really well if I keep that tag low enough. But anyway, those are my two standard rigs, and they both center around that egg. I love having that egg in my system to have that confidence. And yeah, I'll then throw the stonefly in the mix. And I love fishing streamers too. Again, to build up a little bit of body heat, cover some water, change things up, see what happens. That egg is central to me, and it starts right after the spawn. It's going to go all the way through beginning of March. It does seem to be second, third week of March, right when the olives start. The egg seems to die down. I've done it enough years to just kind of see that pattern.
Dom, I think you brought up an excellent point about distance between flies. And that's something I'd like to hear your other guys' opinions on, is how much does it matter the space between flies for you?
I think it makes a big difference if you want that second fly to be active in what you're catching fish on. And I think it's something I'm always thinking about even in the summertime is like, what fly am I catching the fish on? What's my sighter angle, and how far is that second fly riding above the, what I consider the strike zone, and based on that and with the feeding behavior and the water temperature, why even have that second fly on if it's not providing a good second option, right? And so I think that's part of dialing in that second option.
So in the wintertime, do you find it more favorable to have them closer? Is that what you're saying?
I guess, yeah, I do. There are times where I have played around with having my tag fly be a heavier fly in the wintertime.
Interesting.
And riding that fly.
Switching the position.
Right, switching position. And I found in that situation, provided I don't have a really lightweight fly on point, I can get away with having that longer distance because they're both going to ride low. I'm just sort of more cognizant of the fact that I'm riding them in line with each other over a 20-inch, period of space or whatever. But
that's interesting because this isn't something that I think I've not given this a whole lot of thought, and it sounds like you actually have given it some thought as to the gap that should be between your flies in the warmer weather versus colder weather. And I've not given it a lot of thought, but I've always found that in the winter I want a little bit more space between my flies, and I just do better with it. Like say in the summer I have 16 to 19 inches between my lead and tag fly. In the winter, that's going to become 19 to 23, inches between flies. And unfortunately, and this isn't all that helpful because I don't have a real good reason for that, but that's what's worked best for me, is more distance between my flies in the winter.
When you say worked best, though, are you catching more fish on both flies or just on the point fly?
Oh, I think so. I think that it is both flies. And I do, like Dom and you guys were talking about a second ago, I do fish a lot of egg patterns through the winter, but I also see more success on the tag fly when it's a little bit farther away from my lead fly during the winter.
Your tag fly is the lighter fly in this case?
I do this.
Yes.
I do this way different. In the winter, I want them really close because I feel like in the winter they're closer to the bottom, so I want both flies closer to the bottom.
Yeah.
I think overall, based on fishing with you guys, I think I fish with my two flies closer together than you guys do. I'm usually at like 12, maybe maximum of 15 inches, at least with with a nymphing rig. I guess in my brain, I have this OCD of I don't want those two flies in a different current seam. So the longer the distance is between fly 1 and fly 2, the bigger chance there is of getting it in seam A and seam B.
I change distances between the flies from point fly to tag fly relative to where I want that upper fly to fish. So even at night, for example, I'll go 30 inches because I'm really trying to cover 2 different zones. And in the winter, I'm more like you, Bill. I'll be 12, 14 inches between the 2 flies. Standard, let's say in a regular season with more average water temperatures and during hatch season, I'll be like 20, 24 inches. Because I'm always thinking, do I want to cover 2 different zones of water? Or in the winter, do I want both flies pretty darn low?
Yeah, definitely. And winter is one of the only times of the year I will run my tag, and not even a tag, I'll run a trailer, and I don't really do that any other time of year, but it's that one time of year where I think that my chance of success of having 2 flies in the same part of the water column may outweigh my chances of having him in 2 different sections of the water column. And so I'll play around with that.
I'm the
as well.
same.
Yeah.
In the winter, that's when I run the trailer system the most.
Guys ever vary the length of your tag in the wintertime?
The tag.
Or same tag length?
Interesting.
5 inches. What about you?
I don't really change it.
No.
Yeah. Just curious.
Depends how cold it is out.
The more I change flies, the shorter it gets.
That's right. It does. That's
until
right.
It's just a little nub, and then it looks like my fly's crawling up my main line.
Yeah.
Especially if you do that triple Davy, you're going to lose so much more material. Right, Austin?
I remember Austin fishing with you one time, and I just remember we were fishing like real close together, and so we were like standing next to each other while we were retying, and you were tying a fly onto it had to have been like a 1.5 inch tag, and I was just blown away by how short it was.
Right.
You should have said something.
We should have a competition someday.
See who can tie the closest knot to your tag.
Right, with the shortest piece of line. That's right. It is a skill. It's developed skill.
So I think we've all talked about nymphing and streamers, but I do think in the wintertime, I've had some really epic midge hatches that do provide a good opportunity to catch fish on dries. I know kind of the one year I dialed it in where I knew it was starting at, let's say 12:45. And so I found like a little honey hole that I knew they'd rise at.
Yeah.
And so I'd show up, 15 minutes before, wait for the midges to come off. I'd get, 5, 6 fish a day, catching dry flies, in the middle of January, middle of February. And it was fun. And so I never pass up an opportunity to catch them on dries.
To fish on top. Absolutely. Our buddy, Chris Hazer, that's what he does all winter long. And he usually fishes the spring seeps like you were talking about, Josh. Is that where you find them, Bill? Mostly around the warmer water?
Mostly in slow tailouts. So if I know there's going to be a midge hatch happening, I'll kind of plan. They seem to pop midday most times, let's say between like 1 and 3 o'clock at some point. Different rivers, different flavors. But I don't know, if you fish a river often enough, you can kind of figure out that exact time frame, and then you can just kind of nymph fish in the morning, and then let me head to a pool and cherry pick a couple on dries.
It's like a local knowledge kind of thing almost. And the more you're on the water, the more you go, oh yeah, almost every day these midges are hatching, and the trout are coming up for these midges almost every day right in this spot.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a nice haircut, Trevor.
Hey, thanks. That's my military cut. I had this cut for years. High and tight.
It is, bud. It's clean. All right, thanks, guys, for another great conversation. So fly fishing in the winter has its challenges. The weather itself can be a battle. But if you're ready to meet those difficulties and adapt your tactics, the rewards are right there. Trout are waiting and looking for your flies on a good day. Hey, you can find a lot more about staying warm in the winter and keeping your gear from icing up in episode 11 of the podcast. It's about dealing with weather and fighting the elements. Likewise, the Fly Fishing in the Winter series on Troutbitten is a wealth of information to fill in the gaps of what we talked about here tonight. Winter trout fishing has a special charm. For me, it's my favorite time to be on the water. And if you can catch trout in cold water with picky trout that are often unwilling to move very far to eat, then you can catch them in any season. Winter trout fishing produces good, technical anglers. That's the truth. Trevor, will you read us out?
I will indeed. Troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers, so dig in and check it out. Navigate through the menus and find what you like. Share it, leave a comment, and use the search page if you're looking for something specific. Navigate by way of the categories and tags. Thank you so much for listening. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment. That really helps us. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.